Are they impractical? Yes. Am I obsessed with capes? Also yes. Hello everybody, June here. Ever since I started subscribing to Burda Style magazine when I first started sewing, so I started sewing in 2008 and then I started subscribing to Burda Style, which at the time was Burda World of Fashion in 2009. But anyway, ever since I started subscribing to Burda Style, or shortly thereafter, I have been 100% thoroughly obsessed with capes. And I actually didn't see them before I started subscribing to Burda, probably partly because I lived to that point most of my life in a tropical area or subtropical area where like coats are not really necessary, let alone fancy ones. But anyway, Burda has, as far as I've known, and I actually in fact have Burda Style, which were called Burda Mode. Burda has gone through a lot of name changes, okay? So let's just call it Burda. I have Burda issues all the way back to 1953, and I think they started in 1952, something along those lines. But anyway, I have issues going back that far, and like capes have always been there. And so I've always really wanted to make one of those capes, but I never got around to it. And then three years ago, yeah, gosh, time flies. 3 years ago, I made a cape coat, which I'll put a link here somewhere. And that is a slightly different style because it is the body of a coat. It just doesn't have any sleeves and it has a cape instead. But the capes that Burda puts out every so often are actually capes. Like there is no coat body, it's all a cape. And that is what I'm going to share with you today because are they impractical? Yes. Am I obsessed with capes? Also yes. And back in November, I got it in my head that I wanted to make a thoroughly impractical cape. And so I started looking and I settled on this particular pattern, which is from the October 2012 issue of Burda. As I said, I have issues going back a long time. I've subscribed for a long time and then I've bought older issues. But anyhow, I had this pattern and I chose this pattern because the truth is I did a poll on Instagram, and of the two patterns that I had chosen, this is the one that won. So I made this one, and it is actually in the plus section. And until very recently, like, you know, maybe a week or two ago, I was under the impression that Burda Style plus size patterns, which runs from size 44 to I think size 52, use a slightly different block than their straight sizes, which run from, I don't know, maybe 34 to also 44. But now I'm not actually sure that there is a different block for the two of them, and maybe I can talk about that in another video because Burda has made some choices starting with the February issue that changes things. But anyway, this is a plus size pattern. I made the size 44 because I figured it's so big. Like I'm about a 46, just slightly over a 46, but this is not a fitted style. So I decided to go with a 44. However, I still made a muslin because I figured if I'm going to spend all this time working with this expensive wool fabric, I want to make sure that this is something that actually fits right. And what do you know? The muslin actually showed a pretty big fit problem. And I am extremely glad that I made this muslin because this would have been kind of wasteful to fix after the garment was constructed. So what I realized was that because of the way that the shoulders are shaped, so it's a cape, but it's not a round cape. There's actually shoulder shaping. It made me look like a linebacker because the shoulders were really wide. So the curve of the shoulder was pretty broad. So when I put that muslin on, I looked like I was ready for the NFL. And so the way that I fixed that was to sort of basically slice off the extra fabric and the muslin, starting from nothing at the seam for the collar, so the neckline, increasing at the shoulder curve, and then again decreasing to nothing at the end of the yoke, because the cape has a yoke and then it has a lower bit. And so that brought the shoulders in. Now I do have sloping shoulders and I do have narrow shoulders, which is a combination that makes fitting tops interesting to say the least. I do, however, think that even if you don't have sloping shoulders or narrow shoulders, these shoulders would have still been very wide on you. And so something to keep in mind when you're making capes, whether you're making this one or a different one, is that just because that garment is not super fitted doesn't mean that there's not going to be fit problems that you need to address beforehand. So I made that change. I also shortened the cape, I think 2 inches. Now I am 5'1.5", which is short for anyone's standards, but Burda drafts for I think 5'6", and I'm not sure in the plus size whether they draft for taller or not, but I usually have to shorten things, and I wanted the cape to come to be on me the same length that it is visually on the model on the magazine. And speaking about the model on the magazine, one thing that I have learned about Burda in the however many years I've subscribed is that when a garment is presented on a model in a sort of unconventional way, there's a reason why. Okay, so Burda is sort of notorious for like really bad modeling poses that don't actually let you see the garment. And sometimes it's because that garment does not actually fit the model the way that it's intended. So for this pattern, there's one photo and the model is wearing the cape open with the arms through the arm slits and straight down on her side. She also looks like she's not happy to be there. Her facial expression is super sus, but I don't think that has to do with the fit. But anyhow, that is how the cape is presented on the model. And once I actually made the cape, I realized why. So this is a drafting problem. The way that they presented this cape is as double-breasted. So there's 2 rows of buttons and they overlap quite a bit, and it's supposed to make for a double-breasted cape. However, the way that it is drafted, if you make this cape double-breasted, that collar, that neckline will choke you. Like, it will literally choke you because it is so small. So small. For plus size, for straight size, for any size, it is really small. So the reason that the model doesn't have the cape done up like other capes that Burda has presented in other issues, is because it doesn't fit her. It's because it's drafted poorly and it would choke the life out of her. So just keep this in mind about the collar. Super small. The way that I addressed this in my actual cape was to not make it double-breasted. So I eliminated the row of buttons and buttonholes further out and only did the ones closer to the edges. So now this is a single-breasted cape, and guess what? The collar is still too small. Well, I should say that the neckline is still too small. It's, I can wear it closed, but it's not super comfortable. And so I'm sorry that I only found this out after I made the cape and it was too late to make changes. I would have definitely scooped out the neckline a little bit had I realized that this would be a problem in my muslin. And I also preemptively lowered the height of the collar. So instead of adding seam allowance at the top, I didn't add any seam allowance at the top, and did a 5/8 seam allowance. So my seam is 5/8 from the top, but anyway, so basically makes my collar 5/8 of an inch shorter. And that's still kind of high. A second reason why I think the model in the magazine is modeling the cape the way that she is because of the position of the slits for the arms. So the arm slits on this cape are very forward, like they're very close to the center front, which makes putting your arms through kind of awkward when the cape is closed. So if you have the cape closed and you put your arms through, it's weird. It causes everything else to spread. It's not in an anatomically comfortable place. What I think should have happened is that they should have put these slits further out to the side, not all the way to the side seams, but definitely a good several inches out from where they are now. So of course, if the model was to put her arms through a closed cape and stood there, it would look very awkward. And I'll show you here a picture of what it looks like on me when it's worn that way. So of course, all of those things combined, yeah, they have the model wearing the cape open, just standing there looking like she wanted to kill somebody, because that's what she looks like. That's the look on her face. So those are the big two issues that I have with this cape, and they have nothing to do with me. They are definitely drafting problems. I don't know whether the slits where they are a design problem or they just didn't think it through, but I don't think it actually works. But friends, we have to talk about this collar. I don't know why I thought that a stand collar would suit me. It doesn't. I have a very short neck, and even with having lowered the height of the collar, it's still pretty high. And while I love the idea of it, I don't love how it looks on me. So I will probably never wear this cape with the collar fully done up. However, I will wear it with either the collar left open or even folded down. Now, this is not meant to be a fold down collar, but it does lay flat when you do that. So it's not an absolute tragedy, but yeah, collars that are that tall are just not for me. But going back to the construction process, it's actually a pretty simple construction process. The pattern does tell you to do the top stitching by hand, and no, absolutely not. I will not do that. I did not do that. So I did all of my top stitching by machine. I did use top stitching thread on the top, and I used regular thread in the bobbin that matched the color of my top stitch thread. So I deviated, I guess. It's a style thing. It doesn't actually change anything. One tricky thing with the construction, however, is that they don't actually give you a full lining pattern. In fact, there is no lining pattern. You have to figure it out. And for the back, it's fine. It's easy because it's just the same pieces. But for the front, because you have a facing, you kind of have to, I don't know, do a little finagling with the front piece, folding it where you would fold the facing, and then tracing a new piece for the lining, adding some allowance or whatever. So it's not super beginner friendly. It's not super simple. It's not difficult, but it is something to keep in mind. That the lining for the front parts can be a little bit tricky. The insides of my coat look great. And if I had just sort of bound the seams, I think this would have been fine unlined. I did, however, add a lining, and the lining cost me some headaches. It's a very simple lining once you actually have the pattern pieces, but the instructions for how to line this cape in the pattern are terrible. I kind of had to figure it out by trial and error, and in the end it worked out, but it took me days to figure this out. And once I had the lining in and I tried on the coat, I noticed that the hem bubbled up, because what was happening, it's not that my lining was too short. It was that when I put it on, the lining sort of got caught on my clothes, and it wasn't anchored to the cape except for the front seams. So not the front seams, the seams for the facing. It wasn't anchored anywhere else. So when the lining gets caught on my body, it makes it shorter, and then it bubbles the hem up. Now, this was an easy fix, and if you saw my video for my previous cape coat, which I'll link here somewhere, the vintage way of making sure this doesn't happen, because in vintage patterns the lining is hand sewn all the way around, and the lining for this cape is not bagged either, so you could have hand sewn it. But anyway, I had already put in the lining. So in the vintage way, you usually match side seams and maybe center back seams if there are center back seams on your lining. And on the inside, when you have the wrong sides together, you secure the seam allowances of both the lining and the outer fabric, anchoring those seams so that lining doesn't move around in ways that you don't want it to. Of course, as I said, I had already fully sewn my lining, including the hem, and I was not going to undo that. So what I did was I went in from the inside, so from the right side of the lining, and with a prick stitch, which is virtually invisible, I secured the lining to the wool cape, to the actual shell, in strategic places so that it wouldn't get caught on my body that way. Now, there is no center back seam for the lining of this cape, even though there is one for the lower part of the back. So for that, I just found the center line for the lining and made sure that everything was laying flat and proper. And then I did the same thing with the prick stitch. I just went in and secured it. And so now the lining is securely attached to the shell, and it doesn't move around when I put it on. And finally, for construction, I want to talk about the buttonholes. And this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of tutorial, and we'll get to that in another video maybe. But home machines are absolute crap at making buttonholes at the best of times. And while I think I could have probably made buttonholes for the lower parts, of the 3 buttonholes that actually go on the body, I didn't think that I could make the one at the collar because of all the seams and everything. So I'm incredibly lucky that I live in New York City and that there's a vibrant and thriving garment district despite a lot of closures. And there is a place here called Jonathan's Embroidery where they do buttonholes while you wait. So I packed my cape in a bag, took it to the garment district, and they made all 4 buttonholes for me. I brought my own thread because I wanted it to match the top stitching. And for $7, they made 4 buttonholes in like 3 minutes while I waited. 100% worth it. From now on, I am never making my own buttonholes for capes or coats again. I'm only going to do that. So despite all of the shortcomings of this cape, I am extremely proud of my handiwork here. It truly is fantastic. All of the seams match, the top stitching matches. There's one thing I could have done differently in attaching the collar. Live and learn. It doesn't bother me, and I don't think anyone's gonna comment. I don't think anyone's gonna notice that either. But aside from that, I absolutely love the look of it. And even though I don't love how the collar looks on me when it's buttoned up, when I put that cape on to go outside to take pictures, I felt like a bad bitch. And it is just, I just love making coats. I love working with wool coating, and first of all, it's a wonderful textile to work with, and it's so malleable and you can do so much with it. But also it's that sense of accomplishment, like, oh man, I made this cape, right? I made this coat, and I made it look good. And I don't think you can put a price on that. Although if I had to charge for this cape, I would probably have to charge about $1,000. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.